Page number 247 continued. But 2 steps and he was riveted to the spot by the crackling noise of a long volley of shots in the direction of Bhendi Bazaar. He stared ahead. He could not see a soul. Then suddenly men came falling over each other, shrieking and wounded. He felt no pity for anybody nor for himself. He could not imagine the men being mown down by machine guns. His mind was a blank. A volley of shots followed from behind him. Munnu turned on his feet and ran up a steep alley. He could see the palm trees waving in the crest of the Malabar hill. He made for it, drawn as it were by a mysterious faith in the safety of mountain tops, which seemed to be confirmed by the tranquillity of the bungalows on its edges. The sound of firing had ceased by this time, but the weird noises of the riot followed him. When he reached the end of the road, he sighted an uprise. This, his instincts told him, was the slope of his objective, for there the din of the shooting seemed to have receded. End of page 247. Now page number 248. The sun was blazing and there was very little shade on the way. Munnu sweated. He felt faint with fatigue and hunger. His body seemed no longer his own, because it lagged behind his will to go on. What has happened to me? He asked himself. Where has my strength gone? There was no answer and he felt stupid. Then he thought of the men whom he had seen falling dead behind him. They must have been shot dead by the police and the soldiers. Their friends and families would mourn for them. He too was sorry for them. He knew the pain a man must feel when he was writhing in the agony of death. At least he thought he had tasted that pain whenever he was hurt, and the memory of a goat mourning while she was being butchered by the Mohammedans of his village on their Eid festival came to his mind. But no occasion on which he had felt or seen death was as real as this. Before, he had always been unconscious of suffering. Now the feeling of pain seemed to tinge everything. For the first time in his life, he realized the hardness of life. But he did not curse his destiny. Born to toil, the abundant energy of his body had so far overcome all his troubles. He had found that he was fairly happy when he had food every day. He was in love with life and thrilled to all the raptures of the senses. And he still regarded the trappings of civilization, black boots, watches, basket hats, and clothes with all the romantic admiration of the innocent child. As he walked along, he looked for one of those moving stalls which sell roasted ram and cheap sweets to the servants of sahibs in the European quarters of Indian towns. There was no one in sight. He continued tiredly through the long avenue of the palm trees with branches flattened by the wind. On his left was the sea. On his right, the bungalows of the rich, standing like inviolable fortresses on the promontories of the Malabar hill. Above him were the hanging gardens, and below the panorama of the island and harbour of Bombay. He stared across the drive of a square-fronted house which lay covered with close-clipped ivy, beyond to the beds of a garden guarded by a double belt of trees. There was something frightening to Munnu's humble mind in the self-conscious complacency of this building. So he withdrew his gaze and, standing right in the middle of the road, looked down to the island at his feet. He stood dazed with the beauty of the scene. Through the dim haze of a far horizon could be discerned forests of masts floating in the azure waters of the sea. End of page number 248, now page number 249. And the sails swelling with the breeze that seemed invisible. Nearer, the shapeless mass of city buildings rested under the coconuts and palms, while the fern-covered rocks bravely guarded the pearl-like bay in the shell of a transparent mist. The city, the bay, the sea at his feet had an unearthly beauty. The loud honk of a car, and there, before he could jump aside, he was knocked down. He rolled down the hill, urged by an instinct to avoid hurt, but the front wheels of the vehicle passed on his chest before it came to a standstill. "Oh, what an unlucky thing to have happened to us!" exclaimed Mrs. Mainwaring. "Right on the day of my arrival from home, too. First these riots and then this accident. I hope he isn't dead. Let me see." She applied her hand to his heart and passed it over his head with the skill of a woman who had taken a first aid diploma at the Regent Street Polytechnic. "His pulse is all right," she continued. "He is only stunned." "Oh, Mummy, what can we do?" cried little Sir Mainwaring. "Let us put him in the car," said Mrs. Mainwaring, "for if someone sees him, they will stone us to death. You don't know what these hooligans are. Chauffeur, put him in the car. We will take him to Simla with us." I wanted a servant. The chauffeur, a Mohammedan, recognized Munnu to be a Hindu, and excited beneath his apparent reserve by strong religious sentiments, he did not care if the boy died or what happened to him. If he had met him alone, he might have killed him deliberately. As it was, he thought he had done so accidentally. He would have left him lying there, but he was afraid of the Mem Sahib. So he lifted the heathen and deposited him in the car. "Pick up the luggage at the Taj," said Mrs. Mainwaring, "and let us be on the way as quickly as possible. Avoid the city and skirt round to the Colaba road, and let us be in time for supper at Baroda." Munnu revived before the motor car in which Mrs. Mainwaring was travelling to Shimla emerged from the outskirts of Bombay. End of page number 249. Now page number 250. When the Chevrolet hooted into the rest house at Baroda at supper, he was up and doing. And during the leisurely, luxurious 2-day journey up to Kalka, the boy recruited his health somewhat. But really, he was mentally and physically broken. And as he thought of the conditions under which he had lived, of the intensity of the struggle and the futility of the waves of revolt falling upon the hard rock of privilege and possession, as he thought of Ratan and Hari and Lakshmi and the riots, he felt sad and bitter and defeated like an old man. To Mrs. Mainwaring, however, he was not the old man he felt himself to be. Otherwise she would have had no use for him and would have left him where she had found him. He was not old to Mrs. Mainwaring, nor even middle-aged, nor even a brute of a young man. He was to her a young boy with a lithe, supple body, with a small, delicate face, and with a pair of sensitive poet's eyes. "What is your age, boy?" she had asked him. 15, Mem Sahib, he had answered, and she had looked into his dark eyes for a moment with her own dark brown eyes, once pinched him on the arm with a playful flourish of her long thin hands, patted him on the forehead, and drawing her olive ivory Modigliani face backwards till it compressed her thin lips into a voluptuous pout, smiled at him and giggled. For a boy of 15 was just what she wanted, and however old Munnu felt inside him, she neither cared to know nor had she the capacity to know. He was just the boy for her, just the right servant. She would be good to him, which was easy because she was good-natured. Mrs. Mainwaring was descended from an old Anglo-Indian family of 4 brothers who had served as soldiers of fortune in the pay of the East India Company during the English wars of conquest in India. Her grandfather, the only survivor, had fought by the side of John Nicholson during the mutiny and begot her father, William Smith, through a Mussalman washerwoman. William Smith became a sergeant in the Monroe Infantry, a private privately owned regiment of the Eurasians. On the organization of the Indian Army by the British government in the 90s, this irregular force was disbanded and the soldier adventurer in Sergeant Smith sought the prices of service in a feudatory native state. Knowing that it was easy for a white man to get a higher rank, even if less pay, in the Nawab of end of page number 250, now page number 251, Zalimpar's army, he would get in the British Indian Army, to which he was being transferred from the Monroe Infantry. He had gone and secured a direct colonelcy in Zalimpur. Here he had married the daughter of an English engine driver. May was the only child of the union, for the colonel's wife left him a year after May's birth because she was expecting another child by someone else. May was looked after in her early childhood by the wife of a Catholic missionary and then sent to the convent of the Sacred Heart at Shimla. As she grew up in the hill station among the children of the English officials who were continually talking of home, May developed a tremendous inferiority complex about her origin. She vaguely knew that she was English only at fourth remove and that there was Indian blood in her from her grandmother's side, but she had to pretend to be Pakka in order to cope with the snobbery of the other children. She built up a fairy tale picture of her family's estates in Western Ireland and sought to disguise her dusky hue under thick coats of powder and the camouflage of her Celtic origin. Since, however, this did not convince the smarter among the other girls of her purely white pedigree, she was miserable at school and ultimately ran away from it to Zalimpur, obsessed with the ambition of going to England to whitewash her colour if possible. Her father, of course, could not afford to send her to the Cheltenham Ladies' College where she wanted to go, and there was an awful scene between the two of them. But May's ambition to become Pakka White, which was at the back of her desire to go to Europe, was satisfied more easily. A young German photographer, Heinrich Ulmer, who did splendid business in Zalimpur by flattering the vanity of the princes and the courtiers with large life-size portraits, fell in love with the very dusky hue which was causing her all this trouble. May persuaded herself that an alliance with a thoroughbred German was as easy a way of legitimizing her Pakkahood as going to Cheltenham, and though her early training under the care of the parson's wife and her schooling in the convent of the Sacred Heart was instilled into her mind a horror of sex, she married Heinrich Ulmer. Unfortunately, however, the war broke out 2 years after May's marriage and the German was interned in a concentration camp. May already had a daughter by Heinrich Wilmer, romantically named Penelope, and a son was born to her soon after the outbreak of the war. End of page number 251. Now page number 252. For a time she mourned the loss of her husband, but she had never really gone out to him in mind and body. She had never really given herself to him, for although when once he broke her physical virginity, she had outdone him in her display of physical passion. She had really remained a virgin at heart, as if pulled back always by the fear of sin which had sunk deep into her subconscious through her early Christian training. Her warmth, her ardour, her intense capacity for desire must have been due to the blood of her pagan Indian grandmother in her. Her curious coldness of mind, the frigidity which had once made her jump into a bath of ice water in order to quell the passion in her body, was conditioned by the European Christian doctrine of sin. The fundamental contradiction of these two opposed things in her nature resulted in perversity. She indulged in a strange, furtive, surreptitious promiscuity. She gave herself to people at their least felt impulse, and of course invariably regretted having done so in her mind afterward. She exerted her female charms on the education minister of the Zalimpur state and got a job teaching in a children's school. To keep her job, she had to please other men, and being a pretty woman and one of the few emancipated women in the world where the female sex is veiled off from the sight of the male, she was the object of admiration of rich courtiers, high officials, eminent judges, both English and Indian. If her mind had not been reacting against a deep-rooted belief in the sin of sex, she might have had an integrity of character which would have saved her somehow from the onslaughts of these men. But vacillating between a belief she felt to be wrong and a desire which was continuously insistent, she became a bitch to all the dogs that prowled round her bungalow. Aga Raza Ali Shah, a Persian captain in the Nawab's army who was somewhat of a poet, was caught in the mesh of her black locks. He got her to divorce Henrik Alma and married her. He dearly loved her and would have made her happy, since she was a better lover than anyone she had met, more cultured than Henrik and all the toadies and bloated idiots of the courts, and a tall, handsome man with abandoning energy and vigor. But now, suddenly, the ambition to regain her English nationality again began to disturb her. She played havoc with his feelings by frequenting the barracks and officers' bungalows of the English regiment in the cantonment of Zalimpur. Aga Raza Ali Shah beat her in a fit of jealousy one day and kicked her out of his bungalow. Page number 253. Now she was not unhappy about it, because she had been carrying on with a young subaltern of the Royal Fusiliers, a thoroughbred Englishman named Guy Mainwaring, much younger than herself and therefore easier to blackmail than the older man would have been. She told him she was expecting a child which she believed to be his. Guy Mainwaring was too decent and chivalrous as an Englishman not to be taken in by this. A Mohammedan divorce is easy to obtain. She married Guy and proposed that they should spend their honeymoon at home in England. Guy took 6 months' leave of absence and took her and her children to London. Here she presented him with a baby girl of a darker hue than Guy expected his child to be, and he had a suspicion that it looked more like Captain Raza Ali Shah than himself, a suspicion which was confirmed by me when one day, in a hysterical fit of abject humility, she broke down and confessed her guilt. Guy Mainwaring's parents, who were extremely conscious of their blue-blooded, upper-middle-class Englishness, had already heard of the boy's blunder and refused to see him. Guy was lonely, he was miserable. In his utter helplessness, he sought relief in May's embraces as a child in his mother's, and having inherited with his true blood the traditional English habit of escaping from reality, he buried his head in the sand like an ostrich and decided to forget all about life in his dedication to duty. He would muddle through his business anyhow and never face the facts squarely with regard to May, however sensible he might be in other things. May insisted on staying on at home, the heaven she had gained after all these years of waiting. When Guy's leave was up and he had to rejoin his regiment at Peshawar, on the northwestern frontier of India. She made the excuse that she wanted to get a diploma in teaching at the Polytechnic and to look after the children a bit before they went to secondary school. Guy, the young fool, was taken in again. He was haunted by memories of the ineffable bliss he had enjoyed in May's embraces. He became a slave to her, indulging every whim, every fancy, every capricious desire that she expressed. He voluntarily made an allowance of half his pay to her and settled on her half the fortune he had inherited from his mother, who had suddenly died of disappointment and chagrin at the mess he had made of his life. End of page number 253. Now page 254. As he wrote the most tender, sentimental love letters from Peshawar, where he was in a funk, fighting against the Muhammad tribesmen and guarding the frontiers of the Empire of England. May worked assiduously to regain the spiritual heritage of her race on the strength of this liberal allowance by going to the cinemas, theatres, cocktail bars and nightclubs. She lived in Bayswater and being received by the retired Anglo-Indians who rotted in the boarding houses of that district, completely out of touch with India and alienated from their own people, she fancied herself Pakka. When she had inured herself to the belief of her Pakkahood and begun to take her nationality for granted, she recognized the need to integrate herself with real culture, for these Anglo-Indians lived completely in a void, having won the whole world and lost their souls in the bargain. She secured an invitation to Bohemia through a young poet who had been flattered by her application for his autograph at a lecture of his, into making her his mistress. She believed every rhyme to be a great poem and every photographic portrait to be a great work of art. She slept with any verse writer or painter who would notice her, but as she chattered incessantly about cheap Hollywood films and behaved as an utter bourgeois snob, they soon tired of her and dismissed her as a silly woman. Guy had been writing to her dutifully, regularly, imploring her to come back to India. She had always pleaded the care of Penelope and Ralph and the baby. Then, when that excuse did not work, and realizing in a fit of thoughtfulness how good Guy had been to her, she conceded in so far as to agree that she would return to India for a year with the baby, the elder children being fixed up at a boarding school. It was summer, however, and she said she could not bear the heat of the plains and be with him at Peshawar. So she rented a flat near Ananddale at Shimla for the season for her, and while he grilled in the plains, she was now going up with Munnu and the baby to live at the capital of the Government of India. Guy said he would be able to snatch a fortnight's leave and run up to the hills, but she did not care. Munnu contemplated her with a restrained wonder, sufficiently exciting to thrill him to the marrow of his bones. No white woman, no woman even, had condescended to look at him quite like that. True, he had felt strange, inexplicable urges in his being about little Sheila at Shamnagar, and had enjoyed sitting in the lap of Prabha's wife and loved Lakshmi. But end of page number 254. Now page number 255. What he felt in response to the pinching, patting and the coquettish smiles of this Memsahib was something different. Of course, he dared not think of anything bolder in his callow, subservient soul, and he stood half afraid on the borders of happiness, complimenting himself on the good luck he felt he had come across, and wondering if there was any significance in the Memsahib's familiar behavior apart from mere kindness. They had reached Kalka at the foot of the Himalayas. Mrs. Mainwaring had gone to the station restaurant for breakfast. Munnu looked across at the mountains with love for high altitudes which was in his bones as he waited in the yard with the Mohammedan chauffeur, who was more friendly now than he had been at first. The steep hills rose sheer before him, overgrown with an abundance of cool green vegetation, reverberating with the delicate refrains of small waterfalls. The spring air was crisp, and the sun rose almost as it used to rise over the burning iridescent hills of Kangra, except that a few porous clouds rolled swiftly across the sky and rested like huge flakes of cotton on the peaks of these Himalayas. The Mem Sahib came blustering to assimilate her female trappings, losing her bag, finding it, dropping her pin and not finding it, trying to keep little Sirs under control, and exasperated because she strayed, buying fruit here, sweets there, giving instructions to Munnu to do 100 different things on the platform, where the English soldiers on police duty whistled to her and made her uncomfortable, asserting herself by exchanging memories with the old station master whom she knew, walking past the narrow gauge toy railway, chock full of Englishmen, women and children, native clerks and shopkeepers and hillmen with their baggage, which stood in readiness to depart, and nervously ordering the chauffeur to fill up oil and petrol for the 50-mile journey ahead of them. At last the car was on its way, skirting the hairpin bends of the wonderful cart road, which seemed even to Munnu a miracle of achievement, as it belted the zigzag courses of mountains and granite rocks. He was pleased with life, especially as the Mem Sahib had, with her own hands, given him some apples and bananas and sweets. End of page number 255. Now page number 256. And now he devoured the landscape with those restless brown eyes of which seemed to have an insatiable zest for experience. He was wonderstruck at the baby railway which he had seen standing at Kalka station, ascending the gigantic heights with strange puffs such as a toddling child utters when he first learns to walk, crawling through long tunnels and circling up and up even with the car, so slow though it seemed in its movement. He wished they had been travelling in that train. His child's heart, excited by the playful interest which little Sirs took in the toy thing. The sight of stray houses on the slopes of the mountains took him back to his own home, and he had the feeling that it was only yesterday that he had left the village in the valley. A ruined fortress which capped a far distant peak encouraged the illusion because it looked like the crumbling temple of Durga near Hamirpur, and the angry nalas that gorged their ways through the fastness of these mountains completed the vague similarity. He saw himself in his mind's eye climbing the uphill paths and gaining steep precipices. It seemed to him that he was ploughing the terraced fields before sowing barley or wheat. He was beginning to feel in his proper element. But the air became cooler and crisper as the car ascended higher altitudes, and the devdars and the cedars that grew on the flat inclines shattered the illusion. That sight of the strange modern Solan Bazaar with its gown shops and restaurants, and the hotel where Mrs. Mainwaring rested for tea, gave him something new to think about. He wished there had been a bazaar like that in his own village, as then he would not have wanted to go to all the big cities. The endless lengths of the mountains, the far, far stretches of sky-high peaks covered with snow, the colossal solidity of their shapeless masses aroused in him the feeling which he always used to have in his childhood, the urge to say what a great fool God was, that when he came to relieve himself, he excreted mountains and mountains and mountains, and that when he came to make water, he poured down vast, vast, vast sheets of river. He did not want to make fun of God, though, because he saw some coolies and hillmen trudging up to Shimla, borne down beneath the sacks of foodstuffs on their backs, and he thought that it was the blessing of the Almighty that he sat comfortably, being carried in a motor car. It was nice to be hurried along past trees and houses. End of page number 256. Now page 257. Ponies and men, up and up the heavenly heights above the clouds. And when the Chevrolet sped past the stupendous castle which Mrs. Mainwaring pointed out to her daughter as the Viceroy's residence, when it passed under the shadow of an amorphous world of huge offices, bungalows and huts spread on the back of a magnificent plateau, when Munnu stood securely and proudly while coolies clamoured for the right to bear the passengers' luggage, when he was driven down to Anand in a rickshaw by coolies, he was very happy in his heart. Munnu found that as the Mem Sahib's servant, he had to fit into a new state of existence. His exact duties were not defined. He was just to remain at his mistress's beck and call, to do anything and everything that her ladyship desired at a particular moment. But in spite of the miscellaneousness of his duties, his life in Bhujji House dissolved itself into a kind of pattern. Miscellaneousness. 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 He was awakened early at dawn by Aladad, the Khansama, from the corner of the small dark room in the servants' quarter 20 yards below the bungalow, which served as the kitchen for the household and as bedroom and living room for the two of them. He had to light a fire in the primitive kitchen range and to put the kettle on to boil for the Mem Sahib's tea. Aladad himself sat nursing his white beard and smoking the hubble-bubble before going to the lavatory. Munnu hurriedly made tea, showed the tray to Aladad to see if he had put everything in order, and bore it up to the Mem Sahib's bedroom. Little Sirs was already up, running around in her pajamas, clamouring for breakfast. Mrs. Mainwaring, who had gone to bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, cursed at her daughter for disturbing her sleep and bullied her to clean her teeth and wash her face if she wanted her chota hazari. As the child was self-willed, obstinate and disobedient and wanted to be noticed all the time, Mrs. Mainwaring smacked her and sent her down to the servants' quarter for some time. She herself put on a dirty black skirt over her pajamas and a red polo jumper over her nightcoat, and with Michael Arlen's green hat in her hand, sipped her cup of tea. End of page number 257. Now page number 258. Munnu began to sweep the sitting room and the veranda, happy in the contemplation of the green, rain-soaked verdure of Annandale at his feet, and intoxicated by the deep, rich smell of the pine cones and resin. Mrs. Mainwaring saw him, self-contained and absorbed, brushing the carpets, dusting the furniture, sweeping the floor, and she wondered what he was thinking, or whether he thought at all. She would have loved to have asked him to come and talk to her, but he was a mere servant. How could she think of such a thing? And yet she felt she was like Michael Arlen's Iris Storm, a much misunderstood woman. Why didn't the world understand, she said, how a woman gives herself in love, in pity, in tenderness, in playfulness, and in 100 different moods? What right had people to judge one? Why can't I give myself to this boy? She asked. The regular curves of his young body, his quick, sudden flashes of movement, stirred the chords of her being in a strangely disturbing manner. But she, more than Iris Storm, had a pagan body and a Chislehurst mind, and she blamed the air of Shimla, which so conduced to thoughts of pleasure. So she arose and laced about the bedroom, doing her long black hair, which was prematurely streaked with white, powdering and rouging her face. Munnu, who was naturally interested in the mysteries of her toilet, stole around the bedroom arranging things, but always at some distance from the Mem Sahib. Mrs. Mainwaring's heart palpitated with the ache of that desire which she had sought to stifle by occupying herself at the dressing table. "Fetch me the scissors from the Gol Kamra, boy," she ordered in a tone calculated to suppress her dim awareness of the tenderness she felt for him. "Yes, Mem Sahib," Munnu answered, and proceeded to obey her command. When he came back with the scissors, she took them, and deliberately taking hold of his hand, which she knew to be dirty from dusting, exclaimed, "You unclean boy, look at your hands, they are filthy, and look at your nails, they have never been cut for ages. Go and wash your hands and come back. I will file your nails for you." Munnu did as she asked, willingly, for he had seen her. End of page number 258. Now page number 259. The previous night manicured her own hands with strange instruments which she kept in a velvet box. Maid treated his hands with tender movements, smiled at him, and carelessly undraping her right leg before him, flourished a silken handkerchief which she had soaked in eau de cologne at him. Then she looked at him with a wild flutter in her eyes, and completing the manicure with protracted blandishments, said, "Beautiful boy, lovely boy, you want a wife now, you only want a wife now." Munnu smiled with the quivering ripples of affection that the contact of her hands had produced in him. He felt dizzy with the intoxicating warmth that her coquettish movements had aroused in him. He hung his head down to avoid the embarrassment which he felt, and yet unable to control the fire in his blood, he fell at her feet in an orgy of tears and kisses. She pushed him away suddenly, shouting, "What impertinence! What cheek! Go to your work. Go and get your work done. Get the breakfast ready." Munnu rushed away to the servants' quarter, feeling very guilty, and wondered how he could face the Mem Sahib again. But he had to face her because the breakfast was all ready to be laid out. Only Sirs made it difficult for him by asking him when he came to lay the table, "Why are you crying? Has mummy beaten you?" Still he forgot about the misery during breakfast, for this had always been a celebrated meal in Mrs. Mainwaring's household, wherever that household had happened to be during the last 3 years. It started at 8 o'clock and finished at 12 to 12:30. It had been adopted under the doctor's orders, for Mrs. Mainwaring had been ill, very ill, with a gallstone in her bladder. The surgeons in 3 London hospitals had advised her to have the gallstone operated upon and cut, but she was not sure whether she had a gallstone in her bladder at all. She would not have any part of her body removed, though she would not have minded having her body under the waist chopped off, because she said she was disgusted with the use of which God put it. Anyway, fancying herself ill and not wanting to have an operation performed, she had gone to Dr. Stephenson, the food reform specialist, who declared that the pills and mixtures which the hospitals gave her were foul, and that he would cure her in his own way in a day. "Eat more fruit," he said, like the Covent Garden posters. "Eat apples, pears, peaches, grapes, and 8 shelled almonds every morning." End of page number 259. Now page number 260. "On no account suck oranges. Carry out my instructions every morning and you can become well." She was very impressionable, and once an impulse or an idea occurred to her, she was obsessed by it, and it made it a law. The suggestion about diet went home because she had been overeating for months. She took Dr. Stephenson's advice and adopted apples, pears, grapes, almonds and force as a menu for breakfast. And relishing the taste of the fruit, she felt she was cured, though she had really not been ill at all and had only fancied herself as a poor, helpless, suffering little thing to get the sympathy of her friend. But the fancy was pleasant. The delights of a rich fruit breakfast were immeasurable, especially because a fruit breakfast could not be hurried and was a convenient method of killing time. She peeled the apples and pears and even the grapes slowly, delicately, with infinite care, casting the peel in saucers, in plates and about the table, till the table looked a sickening sight. And she sat about the table, and she sat still in the black skirt and red jumper over the pajama suit, a picture of sheer disintegration. By the time she had finished breakfast, the bottles of brandy and gin that lay on the sideboard tempted her, and immediately after these appetizers, lunch was announced. For Allah Dad, the Khansama was punctual to a minute, whatever else he might or might not be. He pretended that it was in the Mem Sahib's interest for him to be up to time, though the cunning old fellow knew that it was also his own interest, because if the tiffin was not out of the way and the afternoon wore on, the Mem Sahib would offer to do the shopping and come to know the bazaar prices, and he would lose the commission he received from the various merchants on the purchases. The 30 rupees pay which Maining Sahib gave him was not even sufficient to feed his wife and daughter and to keep his son at school, he thought. How could he save up for old age if not earning a few rupees in commissions? And there was no harm in robbing the rich. The Sahibs had plenty of money, only the Indians were poor. Mem Sahib, what will Huzur desire for dinner? Said Aladad, standing serenely by the table in his white coat and turban with a red kamarband across his waist. Tum-tum, tomato soup, machi, fish, steak and onions, plum pudding. All right? No, Aladad, said Mrs. Mainwaring. Dinner with the Stuart Mem Sahib downstairs tonight, but you come and serve. End of page number 260. Now page 261. All right, Mem Sahib. ORRIGHT. All right, Mem Sahib, said Aladad, rather crestfallen and peeved. If this Mem Sahib knew too much, she was a Kali Mem, Natu, native. The real Sahibs did not know the prices in the market. If he had known that the Maining Sahib had a black beam, he thought he certainly would not have taken this job. However, he was going to endure it as long as possible and see how much she knew, because even the all-knowing did not know all that he knew. Ask the boy to get a rickshaw from the stand, ordered Mrs. Mainwaring. Only 3 coolies, she continued. The boy is to be the 4th. Yes, Huzur, said Aladad, bowing with a weird light in his ordinarily dim eyes. While Mrs. Mainwaring dressed, Munnu and the 3 other coolies he had engaged came with the rickshaw and waited on the drive. The boy wished there was a motor engine attached to the carriage, as he was not looking forward to pushing it uphill. But the rickshaw is the only wheeled vehicle which is allowed in Shimla, except that the 3 great potentates of the hill, potentates, P-O-T-E-N-T-A-T-E-S, potentates of the hill, their excellencies the Viceroy of India, the Commander-in-Chief and the Governor of Punjab, drive in cars or carriages drawn by horses. Apart from these, everyone, to be it a Maharaja or a Member of Parliament, has to be content with the rickshaw driven by men.